Hello, welcome back. Thanks for hanging out during the break. We're gonna switch gears again. So I've talked about this YouTube channel a couple of times this week already. This is a video from a channel called Uncharted X. Let me share the link to the video here. Very, very cool archaeological channel, mostly focusing on ancient Egypt stuff. And in this video, he talks about, the guy's name is Ben. I don't remember how to pronounce his last name. It's not a typical Anglo-Saxon last name, so bear with me. This one is going to talk about mostly these hard stone jars, granite, quartz, hard stone like that. And there's these jars, these vases that are made out of it. And the level of precision that these jars are made with in its topology, it's how smooth it is, how symmetrical it is, how complicated of a process it would take to make these shapes are. And how even with today's modern CNC lathes and routers, we have trouble doing it. And I have a lot of experience with that. Before I'm in the job I am now, a couple of jobs ago, I used to work at a granite shop. We would mostly make stone countertops and stuff like that, but we did all kinds of different stuff. And I was the CNC programmer and operator of the CNC router. So I have a lot of experience with machining stone. And I wanted to go through this and talk about that. And there's a couple of things I think he says that are misleading because I don't think he has the experience that I do when working with stone. But he also brings up a lot of other good points. Now, I originally wanted to go over the original video that he brought this up in that I saw, which was he was giving a talk at a convention that went over this. But in that video of his, he referenced this video, which is a much longer, much more in-depth conversation about what he was talking about at that convention. So we're going to take a look at that. So this is Uncharted X. The guy's name is Ben. Very cool channel. Go check it out, especially if you're into stuff like ancient civilizations and maybe a lost advanced civilization before the Younger Dryas cataclysm, if you're familiar with that. Can I just say that I'm really appreciative of modern YouTube channels not having crazy, drawn out, hyperactive intros? I'm much more appreciative of the really simple, really short channel intros.
Welcome back to Uncharted X. This is Ben, and I hope everyone out there is doing well. A little bit of a different video for you today. Normally I have these produced long pieces, these documentaries that I make on specific topics. In this case, I wanted to share with you my presentation that I recently gave at the Cosmic Summit Conference that was held earlier in the year here in 2024. Now, normally, I think in a lot of the work that I do and the topics that I dive into, they're kind of like a deep dive into a single topic. I wanted to do something a little bit differently in this case and kind of cover some ground. I wanted to talk a little bit about why I think the vase work, these incredible hard stone, precision crafted vases that come to us from, pre-dynastic times, these thousands of years ago in ancient Egypt, why they're so important and how they relate to the other artifacts and architecture and sites that we can find in ancient Egypt. Along the way, we're going to take a look at several different topics. I'm going to give you a bit of an update on what's been happening with the vase scan work, with what that team's been doing. And
So this guy, he has a lot of videos that talk about these vases because for him, they're one of the most indicative pieces of archaeology and evidence that he's been able to grasp onto that suggest that Egypt, pre-dynastic Egypt, was much more advanced than we've been led to believe or have found evidence for. You'll see what I said, but you find it hard to believe the precision can be better than modern machinery and technology. He's going to get into it.
Really looking at this from the perspective of out-of-place artifacts, really how they connect to the rest of what we see in ancient Egypt and in the ancient world, and I think ultimately I want to get to where the opportunities are that I think we could be looking and trying to find more evidence that might shine a light on this mysterious part of our own history. So I do take this from the perspective of what I've been calling out-of-place artifacts. And these are artifacts that show a degree of sophistication or technology that seems far beyond what we know of that were the tools and techniques used by the dynastic Egyptians. Typically, they're made from very hard.
So that's a big point. It's not necessarily that they couldn't have done it. It's that we don't have evidence that they could have done it with the tools and evidenced documentation of how they use those tools to accomplish what we found, particularly the stuff on the screen.
Hard forms of stone.
And I have some issues with that. Like, I'm not fully on board, but my imagining curiosity has me kind of on board with it.
Stone pretty much lasts forever. They come to us from both, all periods of the dynastic Egyptian civilization, certainly attributed to all periods of that civilization, right from the Old Kingdom. In fact, a lot of them, the vases in particular, come from pre-dynastic times, but from the Old Kingdom right up to the Ptolemaic period, the Greek-Roman period, and the end of the ancient Egyptian civilization some 3,000 years later, we find these artifacts that are attributed to periods all throughout that. And as I said, they really come in sizes large and small. Now, despite what I think a lot of people might think about my work, I don't just say like everything is magical, mystical kind of out-of-place artifact. I'm actually quite careful to say what I think can and can't be done by the dynastic Egyptians, because one thing, and this is something that my good friend Yusuf Aoun says a lot, is that you never want to underestimate the dynastic Egyptians. They were an amazing civilization. 3,000 years at the height of their power and wealth, they had just tremendous capability, and they built, a lot of the temples that we see at Karnak, a lot of the work there, not all of it, I think, and, we'll get into that, but, they had tremendous capability and they achieved a whole lot. But there are a number of things that are really out of their reach from a technological perspective that show characteristics of sophistication, precision machining, things like this that really don't match up with what we know about that civilization. And I'm quite careful about what I say can and can't, or what is or isn't one of these out-of-place artifacts. And I kind of have three categories of characteristics, if you like, that I put these into, that when I see it, or you see it in these artifacts, now that's something worth looking at, and potentially considering this could be an out-of-place artifact, something that was beyond the known capabilities of the dynastic Egyptian civilization. And the last thing I'll say here about this is that also these aren't by any means limited purely only to Egypt. We're going to focus specifically on Egypt, and the majority of this talk will be about Egypt, but I am going to show some examples and talk about a few things that come to us from other parts of the world. And you can certainly find these types of out-of-place artifacts that display some of these characteristics from all around the world, from Turkey, from India, from South America, and we'll get into a few of those examples. But the majority of this stuff does come to us from Egypt. There's really nothing else quite like it. It has the vast majority of the world's antiquities. Even just Luxor alone has something like, the region of Luxor alone has something like 1/3 of the world's antiquities just there. So there's just a tremendous amount that's left to us in Egypt, and I think most of the evidence comes from there. The first category that I kind of put these things into, or that I look for, is really that of machining, evidence for machining, particularly in the unfinished work that we can see in artifacts and architecture all around Egypt. And this, to some extent, also does show us the value of unfinished work when we find it. Quite often the finished work will have things like witness marks and, you know, machining marks, tool marks polished out of it. So you don't have an indication of what tool was used to make these marks, but in a few locations you can find unfinished work and the witness marks and signatures of what seem to be very powerful tools that have been used into some very hard stone. Right here we can see examples for things like circular saws, straight saws, very powerful tubular drills. We'll get into that topic a little bit more later on. And, you know, these are things that might not be immediately obvious to, say, an archaeologist who isn't trained or has a background in machining, but they do pop out to people that use tools like these, that leave marks like these, that they're obvious to people who work in these materials. So I'm talking.
I don't know if I agree with that. He's going to talk about why he thinks that stuff, but nothing on the screen here I see that couldn't be done with hand tools and an incredible size of a supporting team. So right here you see this tubular drill mark. This looks exactly like what it looks like when you're drilling holes in granite countertops for like faucets and stuff. You have a hollow drill bit. It's a cylinder, and the very bottom of it is tipped. Well, in modern construction, they're tipped with diamond, industrially created diamonds, and it uses those diamonds to just grind away the stone, and that's what that looks like. Now, could you do that? Could you form a copper cylinder drill bit that looks very similar to modern technology and use that to drill that? Yes, you can. I believe that they could, because much like a water jet, so water jets can cut through stone. The water doesn't do the cutting. There is typically a powdered garnet slurry that is fed into the water stream, and that garnet at high velocity being carried by the water is what does the cutting. It's not the water itself. So could you have formed a copper or bronze hollow drill bit and use the drill bit to move a cutting slurry to be able to cut this tubular drill hole? Yeah, I think you could have. Would that wear out your drill bit very quickly? Yes, it would. Would you need an extremely large team or force of people sustaining the logistics and repairing tools and stuff like that to keep production moving? Yes, you would. But I think my whole premise with this whole thing is I want to believe there is more to this than what we can get from the evidence. I want to believe that ancient Egypt was way more sophisticated, had way more sophisticated technology than we found evidence for. But on the same side, you have to think, like, the pyramids and these statues and these monuments and stuff, they were crafted by extremely skilled craftsmen. Like, you're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of craftsmen who probably had 20, 25, 30 years of extremely high quality craftsmanship, who knew how to work these tools, who had the support teams to be able to keep them supplied with fresh tools, to keep them supplied with the materials for those tools, as in like a cutting slurry or something like that. Agreed, just need the sand dust from a harder mineral than what you're cutting. Yeah, exactly. So I think if you overlook the immense skill that Egyptian craftsmen would have had, and the amount of those highly skilled craftsmen that would have been employed, and then the teams to back them up to keep production going, I think you're doing a little bit disservice and going straight to, well, they couldn't have done this with these tools. I think you're missing a huge part of the puzzle there. But still, it's still very interesting.
About engineers, construction experts, stonemasons, people like that. And those are the people that typically get excited and do a lot of work and investigation into these realms of,
For example, if you want to polish steel, what do you use? You use sandpaper, and polish, which is just microscopic liquid sandpaper. We've built the tools and the supply lines and the production to make those tools to be able to do that. Why couldn't Egypt have found a way to do that and then set up their entire supply line, the kind of tools that they produce and the production of those tools to get this job accomplished in the way that we're seeing right now? We could do the same thing. There's a lot of talk about like, oh, we can't replicate this with modern technology. Well, of course we can't. Our technology isn't set up to do this kind of production. It's set up in a way to do this kind of production with X budget in X time frame. We absolutely could do it the same way the ancient Egyptians do it. All it would take was to set up the budget and the schedule to be able to do it.
Witness marks on ancient Egyptian artifacts. It's guys like Christopher Dunn, who was a manufacturing expert, manufacturing engineer for more than 40 years. A couple of the examples here, in fact, were pointed out and discussed by such people like that who have been on tours with me. For example, in the top left here, you can see this faceted bullnose that's made from granite. It's part of a big granite shrine or box, this incredible piece that's on the...
So that picture right here he's talking about, that faceted bullnose is exactly how you create a bullnose when you're cutting one by hand. So the granite shop I worked in, most of the bullnoses were started on the CNC machine, but when it went to the hand finishers, they would do the high polish in the same way. They had air tools with diamond polishing pads on them, but they would do it the same way. They would do a line. They would polish it in facets. Now, because they're going to a high shine, the facets were much smaller and there were much more of them than you'll see here, but it's the same technique. This is also the same technique you use to turn square bar to round bar in a blacksmith forge. You create many facets until you have so many that you can't tell the difference between a faceted edge and something being round.
The Elephantine Island that's up at or down at Aswan in Upper Egypt, and you can see these faceted lines on this bullnose, these straight lines, these faces that are the result of a tool that's been used to shape this bullnose from the granite. And in fact, we know this is not the intended final shape for this piece because halfway up this bullnose you can see a transition where this has been polished out. Mm-hmm. And you have this nice smooth semicircular bullnose, and all the rest of the bullnoses on the box display that smooth polished finish. But this tool is actually, these marks are showing us the tool that was used to really just shape the granite, to give it that shape. And I was there with quite a famous artist at the time, Almer Allen. He's been featured in the New York Times. He's, his artwork goes for a lot of money. He's quite well known in the art world, and he's been working in materials like stone and metal for more than 30 years. He's an expert in pretty much all forms of machining and working in stone. He started with hand tools, literally hammering and using...
The guy he's talking about, I don't know his credentials, but just keep in mind, just because he's been working with those tools in the stone for 30 years, doesn't mean he's good at it. He might be awful at it, even though he's been doing it for 30 years.
hand tools to physically shape the rock, developed RSI and arthritis in his hands. He moved to power tools, handheld power tools, grinders, all those types of things, and still had problems with his hands. And these days, I believe he does a lot of his sculpting with, programmable 3D, CNC machines like 5-axis mills. So you program the shape you want on a computer, and a robot essentially does the work into the stone for you. So he's an expert in all forms of machining into stone. He's spent years doing each of these different levels of machining. And when he saw this, he pointed it out to us, because I'd seen this box a number of times and I hadn't really noticed this unfinished faceted bullnose. And he was blown away by it and said, look, this is definitely not the result of something that you would do with a hand tool. This is not, a chisel.
I don't agree with that at all, because there are several videos from several creators on TikTok who record themselves making stone decorative trim pieces that include bull noses and OGs and half bull noses, stuff like that, out of stone. Granted, much softer stone with much harder tools, but they're doing it by hand. Now, that means that this could have been done by hand easily. It just would have taken more tools. You would have been going through tools much faster. It would have taken a lot more time. But you have to understand, these megaliths, these monoliths, these massive statues and stuff, they were on project time scales spanning multiple pharaohs and leaders' lifetimes. Like, the pyramids weren't built in one pharaoh's lifetime. It was at least 2 pharaohs. So like each of the pyramids, so like I think the Khafre pyramid was started when they knew Khafre was going to become pharaoh, and I don't think it ended until like his son was middle-aged. Like, these are massive project timelines. So having softer tools on harder stone and worrying about the schedule, I don't think that worry was there. They had budgeted the time to be able to do this stuff with the material they had, with the tools that they had. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at before.
Not going to do this. You're not going to get this from polishing. And again, it's not the intended result like this.
You can get that from polishing. You can polish a hard stone with the dust of a harder stone by hand. It's just going to take forever, and you'll need a lot of that dust.
Is literally the result of a tool that was run along this thing, creating these facets that's really shaping that stone and giving it that.
It didn't necessarily have to be a tool. It could be a slurry coated wooden board. You would just go through many wooden boards and a lot of slurry.
That faceted shape. So it's definitely not a hand tool. We don't know what made it, but we can see the witness mark from the tool right here in the stone. And likewise
it doesn't have to be a tool witness mark. It can just be a highly skilled person with a hand tool.
The bottom right, one of the most interesting pieces of granite you'll find pretty much anywhere in Egypt. It's a big granite slab that's found at Abu Rawash. It's the northernmost pyramid site in the sun belt of pyramids in Lower Egypt, so in that Giza area. And it's a broken piece that's come off something, but this thing actually looks like it's been cut in 2 directions. So you have a circular saw cut that you can see here clearly indicated on that photo, but it's also concave, so it has this concave shape to it. So it's also this dipping. It's not a flat surface. It's a carved concave surface, and if you look closely at it, it's full of these striations and grooves from whatever tool was used.
I think he's talking about this photo here. And I do have to give it to him. It looks like somebody had come in with a circular saw and made a few mistake passes right here. But move my face. Yeah. Oh, went way past that. Right here. This one. That looks exactly what a modern stone saw looks like when you make a couple passes and it goes off track and stuff. But I may come back now. Oh, thanks, appreciate it. It doesn't mean that it was made by a tool that they couldn't have made during the time. It might not even be a circular saw. That it could be a straight saw that may have looked like a very large tree saw, like a two-man tree saw. It could have been that. I'm not convinced this was done by some ancient advanced civilization, electrical powered or other kind of powered circular saw. That's not what it says to me. It says to me that somebody knew, yeah, laser beams for sure. That says to me that somebody knew how to work the material they were working with the tools that they had.
Concave surface, and if you look closely at it, it's full of these striations and grooves from whatever tool was used to make it. And on my most recent trip to Egypt, I was there with a guy named Chris King. Now, if you ride mountain bikes, you're in the Washington area, you might know who that is. Chris King's been making high-end cranks and wheels and parts for mountain bikes for years. He's a precision manufacturing expert. Obviously, you have to be to make those sorts of materials and components. Very familiar with tool witness marks. I mean, he was very interested in a lot of these artifacts. I mean, he brought a magnifying glass. I've actually got a lot of good video footage of him. We've been talking about it. He's starting to do some podcast appearances talking about some of his findings. But he took a close look at this and, again, came to the conclusion that there is just absolutely no way this is the result of anything done with a manual hand tool. He also doesn't think that it was cut sort of in one pass, that there was a width of a tool that was run repeatedly across this thing that gave it its concave shape. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly a topic for a video that I'll probably get into in the future. But again, we can see the result of machining and powerful tools on this stone, and it's really not something that's explainable by the tools and techniques that we know were used in ancient Egypt. And as I said, these examples of what seems to be advanced machining don't come to us only from Egypt. We can also find examples of sophisticated machining techniques turning that type of thing from other places in the world. For example, there's been recently a number of interesting artifacts that have come out of Turkey. There was a portion of a polished obsidian bracelet that was found in central Anatolia in Turkey. You can see an image of what it would have looked like as a whole piece here, and then you can see the fragment of it that's been analyzed here. Now, this is obsidian. There's a piece of it. There's actually a paper you can find that is a full tribological analysis of the technique of manufacturing. Tribology being an analysis of, basically manufacturing and what it takes to make something. And it's very evident that this bracelet, or this fragment of this obsidian bracelet, was in fact turned. And the interesting part about this bracelet is that it's come from a site that's been, carbon-14 dated to the period of around 8,300 to 7,500 BC, so like around 10,000 years old, if not older. And obsidian's kind of an interesting material. Typically, it's worked in the Stone Age or Neolithic times with, by knapping. You hit it with harder rock like flint, and it breaks off in these fragments, and you can get quite sharp edges. It's quite a useful tool. It was even used in South America as a weapon, like jagged fragments of obsidian were embedded into wood, and that was used as a weapon. But in order to get a smooth surface like this, and you can see from this paper, it includes microscopic analysis of the actual surfaces. You really have to turn it, and you have to be very gentle with it, because otherwise you'll snap pieces off of the obsidian. And really, the only way to achieve a shape like this is if it was turned and turned at a relatively high speed. And that's really the conclusion that this paper comes to about this bracelet. And so it's another out of place artifact.
See, I don't think that's out of place, because the ancient Egyptians were super smart. Obviously, they built all these incredible monuments and stuff. Why wouldn't they have been able to figure out how to build something that you could call a lathe, or something that served the same purpose? And obsidian behaves much like glass, where you can use an impact tool to break off shards of it and get a very sharp edge like Ben was talking about, or if you want to precision shape it, you grind it. That's how glass lenses are made. They're put in a lathe type machine that spins up a glass blank, and it's ground into shape. And I think with the demonstrated ability for Egyptians to polish stone, I think they were very familiar about how to grind obsidian into a shape they were looking for. And coming up with a lathe, not that hard of an idea. It's not. I think this is pre-wheel, but I have my doubts that the wheel as we know it being used for transportation may have come secondary to the shape of a circle being employed to gain mechanical advantage on an object.
Relative to all of the other kind of Stone Age obsidian work that we can see, and by no means.
And obviously, I don't think we found any ancient Egyptian lathes because they were probably made out of wood, much like the early European, early American lathes were. They were lathes made out of wood. They were powered by either a water wheel set in a stream or a river, or they were foot powered using pulleys and return springs and stuff like that. I don't see how, as smart as the Egyptians were, I don't see how we would think that they couldn't have come up with maybe not something exactly like that, but something that worked in producing the same rotational motion that a lathe would give you. And then have your grinding compounds, your grinding tools to be able to shape obsidian. I don't see how that's not on the table as an explanation.
Is this the only example that comes out of Turkey? There's another great example that I saw in a Versadoco video, which is a good YouTube channel. I think he dives into this bracelet, the analysis, and this obsidian disc or this bowl or something like that in that video. But you can quite clearly see how this other obsidian disc in the bottom right here was also turned. These grooves don't just... You're not doing that by hand in obsidian. In fact, if you look in the center of it where it's been damaged, you can see what happens to obsidian when you...
A very, very skilled and very, very patient craftsman may have been able to make these grooves by hand. I think Ben's premise hinges on the idea that craftsmen were not extremely skilled at their craft and had the time to do it, or knew how to do it in a way that didn't take a lot of time. Because, hey Ryan, what's going on? Thanks for the birthday wishes. It's not my birthday. It's not your birthday either. Your birthday was just a little while ago. What the hell were we talking about? Oh yeah, so part of Ben's issue, one of the biggest things I take issue with Ben with when he talks about this stuff, is that I think he cannot see these Egyptian products outside of the lens of how we do modern manufacturing, which is governed not by skill or technology, but by money and schedule. And when you take away the money and schedule issues, then we can do anything. All it takes is skill and will.
Hit it and you flake it, it creates this very rough surface where big chunks of it come off. So to get obsidian this smooth and this clean, particularly in these grooves, it's 100% the result of a pretty sophisticated lathe that was used. So if you're interested in more information about machining, I've definitely dived into this topic in a lot of detail in a number of videos. I'm going to link all of these below in the description. I have my part 1 of my Evidence for Ancient High Technology playlist, which really dives into machining as a broad topic. I've got a video specifically looking at this bullnose and the box at Elephantine Island. Also looking at some of the evidence for machining and tubular drills at Karnak and Luxor temples. And then also one that dives into kind of the whole history of investigation into ancient Egyptian stone cutting, how it's explained in the mainstream, the problems with that idea, what the evidence of the stone actually says, things like that. So check those out if you're interested in more details. So aside from machining, another category of evidence that I really think characterizes some of these out-of-place artifacts is that of precision. Now, precision is quite a broad topic. There's a kind of a meta point about precision that I think applies to a lot of this stuff, in particular the boxes and vases, and that's that, precision isn't really ever developed for any other reason than the pursuit of function. There's an absolute relationship between precision and function. Precision in the modern world really started with the need for naval cannons to shoot straight, and then also to develop accurate timekeeping pieces, because it wasn't until you could keep time accurately that you could go and actually accurately measure your longitude, for example. So it once accurate timepieces using precision was developed, then we were able to navigate differently across the oceans instead of just going straight up and down on a latitude and then running down an easting or running down a westing, as it was called. You can now travel diagonally and position yourself on the globe. But in order to measure longitude, you need to have accurate timepieces to do that.
So I have issue with that argument also. Yes, that's true that you needed precision. Precision came out of necessity to make those things happen. But that's not the only reason to have precision. Before that, you had furniture makers that had highly precise pieces of furniture, highly precise pieces of work, not because it needed to be precise, but because a extremely skilled craftsman had part of his business model based on his level of skill, which included precision pieces. So precision isn't just a function of something being functional. It's also a measure of how valuable that item might be based on the skill required to make that thing. And especially in Egypt, where pharaohs and kingdoms were insanely rich, why would they pay for something of lesser quality when that wealth was all about showing off that wealth? And if you were trying to show off your wealth, why would you accept craftsmanship that wasn't of the highest quality? Quality being synonymous with precision.
And then
he's gonna get into it a little later with this pot and these rings around it, and then this face and how symmetrical it is. You got to remember, ancient Egyptians, ancient civilizations in general, while they may not have considered it math, they were extremely good at math and geometry, because they took that precision of geometry, shapes, locations from the stars, and applied that to physical items in their craftsmanship.
Kind of more modern world.
Yeah, they were highly motivated as well. Yeah.
We know that precision really started to develop, particularly around the industrial age, things like steam engines.
Precision started developing around our industrial age for the way that we manufacture things. That doesn't mean that precision wasn't developed for other reasons for different people at different times. Crafting for the gods on threat of death, for money or position and prestige, yeah. All of those motivated people to be extremely highly skilled.
You had to, create pressure vessels that could contain pressurized steam, so you needed to have flat surfaces, and that's developed on to the point that today we have these nanometer processors, and we're packing in millions of transistors into these integrated circuits that are just tiny. And,
right, there wasn't a TikTok back then, yeah.
That. But we do that.
They had real motivators, not just follower counts.
Of just a tiny power footprint and the efficiency of what you can do with those types of integrated circuits. So, precision's developed and pursued in order to get a functional return on it. And I think that's the case with things like the boxes and the vases. I don't think that they were just made that precisely for any other reason other than function. It's one of the main things that leads me to believe that I think these things had a function, that they were later inherited and used ceremonially and in ritual and symbolic circumstances by the dynastic Egyptians. We'll get into that in a bit more detail, but precision in general is probably the easiest way to understand it is when you think about flat surfaces or square corners, but that's by no means the only elements of precision, although we certainly see those in ancient Egypt. You can see Chris Dunn here standing inside one of the Serapeum boxes using a precision square to measure the accuracy of the corner between the lid.
He's using a 10 to 12 inch square to measure the squareness of something 6 to 10 feet long. That's like if I went like this and I wanted to measure the squareness of my thumb and finger and used a square that was 1 by 2 millimeters.
And the walls of the boxes, you can also see the inside corner from one of the granite boxes at Lahoun that's about the diameter of the end of a ballpoint pen. Those are the easiest ways to understand precision, but there are other.
That's like using one of those little plastic squares you'd have in like elementary math class to measure the squareness of a wall, 2 walls in a house.
Elements of precision that really come.
Oh, look, over these 6 inches, my drywall is super square. And then you look down the wall and it's wavy as fuck.
I'm into defining something that's beyond the capability of handwork, and you're talking about things like symmetry and balance. For example, we see this in a lot of the vases. They're just perfectly balanced, even made from stone like diorite. You can see an example of one of my favorite vessels here in the Egyptian Museum in the top left. It seems like it's standing on the point of an egg. It's so well balanced. Another aspect of precision really is symmetry. And we see this in a lot of the statues. Like, it's certainly been documented in the statues and headjets by Christopher Dunn. One of my favorite photos, I've used this one a lot, is up here. It's the reverse transparency overlay of the so-called Ramses head that was for a long time on the ground at Luxor Temple. Today it's 30 feet up in the air on top of a reconstructed statue, so you can't really get a close look at it, unfortunately. But what Chris did was take a photo of it dead straight on, so really take the time to align this thing and make sure it's dead straight on the center line of the face. You take that photo, you copy it, you make them both 50% transparent, you take one of them and you flip it on that vertical axis, and then you overlay them. And that allows you to really look at, okay, you're basically laying the left side on the right and vice versa. And it lets you determine, is there any inaccuracies left to right? You can see there's 2 Chris Dunns in this photo on either side. And it shows that this face is just remarkably symmetrical. And that's been backed up by further analysis of these heads. We also see the similar thing in these headjets or pashents, these crowns, like the one you see in the bottom left. At least from a front-on perspective, these are complex three-dimensional art, objects. They have depth to them. But this is not something that really it never happens with modern artwork. So, for example, Michelangelo's David. It's a remarkable piece of art. It's carved out of marble. I've seen it. It certainly stirs the emotions. I mean, it's amazing, but it's not symmetrical, and you don't see that.
That's not the point. In critiquing this video, I'm starting to romanticize the idea less and less. David's Michelangelo, or Michelangelo's David, and this ancient Egyptian statue were made for very, very different reasons, under very, very different circumstances, using very, very different techniques. It is not hard to create this that stone statue face being perfectly symmetrical if you have very skilled craftsmen who understand how math works. It's very easy to map out a 3D object using lines, string, reference points. The ancient Egyptians knew how to do this. The ancient Romans knew how to do that. The Egyptians just applied it to sculpture, probably to represent power, to represent devotion. It wasn't necessarily art, although it could have been. Art could have played a factor in it, but I don't think that's what its primary purpose was when compared to Michelangelo's David. So comparing the two is still an issue of viewing the past through the modern lens. And I think that's a big flaw with Ben's theories.
In art, you don't really even see it in nature. I mean, human faces aren't symmetrical. We have different sized nostrils.
The Egyptians didn't draw and sculpt human faces. They were trying to convey the images of gods.
Nostrils and eyeballs. So to see it in these types of artifacts, and to see it particularly in stuff like granite that's of a size like this, it's really something that isn't an accident.
Also, here's a good point. When you're working with much harder material, it's much easier to fabricate at a much slower pace, which allows for much less and much smaller mistakes.
It has to have been designed and created that way. And I think it was done on purpose. In fact, it speaks a little bit to the design of the artifact in my mind. I mean, one of the efficient ways of potentially designing this, if you assume maybe it was designed on software or on some form of computer, that you could design half the face and then mirror it, and
doesn't have to be.
You've got the other half.
Draftsmen
of the face
did
there,
it for
and then
decades before computers came
manufacturing system. There's a lot more that is indicative
centuries,
of intelligent design in these artifacts. In particular, this has been shown recently in the Vase Scan project. You can see in the top right here one of the vases and the geometric analysis that's been done on them. And I think one of the most important aspects of that, we'll talk a little bit about the precision that we see in those vases in a minute, but I think one of the most interesting aspects of them, and the one that's probably the most, to me, indicative of sophisticated design, is the discovery that there is a fixed ratio relationship between the circular features of these vases. So what I mean by that is that, you know, the circle is the most widely used primitive in these vases. If you think of the shapes that make up this one particular artifact, you can match the curvatures of any part of it to the arc of a circle, and you can then therefore draw out that circle and measure its radius and diameter, and you can then compare the sizes of those circles that go into it. And there was a discovery by a guy named Mark Vist from unsigned.io. That's his website. He's written an article on this. I'd highly recommend people check that out. I'll definitely link it down below.
So what he's talking about is, if you can read this writing above my head, the image below shows circles from the traversal pattern, meaning over the entire thing, every curve follows this pattern. It's r times n equals the square root of 6 over 2 to the nth power, with r0 equaling diameter t1. So what that means is that every circle on this vase, let me see, I can show you this better. So every circle on this vase, or every curve that this vase is made up of, has a relationship that follows that formula. Which, I mean, that could be discovery bias. You know, that's not It wasn't made like that on purpose. That's just a pattern that the archaeologists and scientists found within that. It doesn't mean it was created like that. Humans are really good at finding patterns. That's like one of the things that separates us from animals and makes us one of the greatest species in the history of the earth, is that we're able to recognize patterns. We even recognize patterns that aren't there. If you've ever recognized a face in some inanimate abstract object, it doesn't mean that thing is a face. It's just that we've recognized a pattern within that looks like a face. That could be much the same thing with this, is that we see this vase and we happen to find a pattern within its fabrication.
But he discovered something called the radial traversal pattern in these vessels, in these vases. He discovered it first of all on what I'd call the OG vase, the original granite vase, the first one that was really scanned and analyzed, that really opened up this whole can of worms on the vases. And what it really is it's a simple way of thinking about it without worrying too much about the math, is that, you know, in all of these shapes and sizes of circles that make it up, from very small, in fact, the circles on this vase go from, you know, having radii of 1.1 millimeters right up to 42 millimeters. There's a mathematical algorithm or, you know, a scalar function that relates that ratio, that size between them. So it basically says that you can only use, so this vessel was only made with circles that match this particular algorithm or function.
Or, much like today, our fabrication is based on the tool that was used to make it. So, when I was working stone on the CNC router, my smallest tool had a diameter. So that means the smallest corner I could make with that CNC machine was the diameter of that smallest tool. The people lacking the ability to see a face in the bushes did not survive to procreate. For sure. Well, I don't know. There's a lot of stupid people in the world still. Maybe a couple of them survived. I'm just saying, these vases, I think this pattern they found is a coincidence, and I think what's actually happening is you're seeing a product that was made with some kind of standardized tool size. As you can see right now, the big vase, that big circle in the middle, I don't know what that's representing, because that circle doesn't match the curvature or the arc radius of the vessel. Like, they're even showing it right there. Like, the body, the upper part, and the neck are all made of 3 different size circles, so I'm not really sure what they're trying to say there.
Random size circles wouldn't fit. You have to be able to go, there's a fixed relationship or a fixed ratio between the sizes of these circles that make up this vase. So it's not random.
Oh, I see what they're saying. So they're saying this large circle, and this circle here. This circle here representing the opening that you can't see, the opening of the vase that you can't see there. So they're saying because the diameter of this circle matches perfectly with the diameter of the vase there, and then you have another circle that follows this formula here, has tangents that touch here, and then you have another circle that follows this formula, is the same diameter as the opening. That's the pattern. So you see this one touches here and here. That's the large diameter of the vase. And you have this smaller circle that touches on the tangents here, and then one right there. So that perfectly follows that formula. And then the mouth of the vase is the diameter matches this also.
It's not somebody that's just decided, well, I'm going to make a vase. I'm going to sit here with my, hammer and chisel and my rock and my sand. I'm going to polish this thing out. Analysis of the geometry of this vase shows that the radii of all the circles that have been used in its construction, and you can see the detail of some of these. They have a fixed ratio with each other, and they can be expressed by this single scalar function. It's called the radial traversal pattern. It means, the radius of circle size n equals the square root of 6/2 to the power of n. And you can scale up that n in that size up to, to +1, 2, 3, 4, -1, -2, -3, -4, etc. And the number you get is, that's the size of that circle that fits that ratio. And those are the circles that have been used in the construction of this vase. It basically shows us.
So that may be a thing. But if that's how you set up your fabrication tools, if all of your fabrication tools and all your measurements are based on the same thing, like an inch or a centimeter, you're probably going to find a similar pattern, maybe not the exact same pattern, but a similar pattern with stuff that's made today.
That this vase was designed, and it was designed mathematically. Now, Mark tested...
Again, ancient Egyptians, very, very concerned and very, very good at math.
This.
It was heavenly. It was based on the stars.
Right, so he tested this by saying, well, now I've reverse engineered this vase, and I've found this relationship. I've found this radial traversal pattern. I'm going to go into CAD, and I'm going to make a vase model based purely on the mathematics. So he went into computer-aided design, CAD, created a model just based on this mathematical pattern, and then he compared it to the scan of the original artifact.
The 3D scan.
And what he found was just, it's mind-blowing.
They digitized a lot of these vases with 3D scanning. Very accurate 3D scanning.
This is astonishing. One of the most amazing things to me about this whole investigation was what he found when he compared this mathematical model that's basically perfect based on the maths that he reverse engineered, and the scan of the original artifact, was that the median radial deviation from the CAD model was 9 microns. So that's saying that the average deviation in the radii of those circles was 9 microns, which is less than a thousandth of an inch, about a third of a thousandth of an inch. And at that resolution, we don't know if we're dealing with inaccuracies in the scan of the artifact, or potentially it's just a little tiniest bit of surface damage because these things are, vastly ancient. That's unbelievable. So not only does it appear that this thing was designed mathematically, it was also executed with just incredible precision to that mathematical design, such that, even with some of our best scanning equipment, we're having trouble determining, is this a problem with the scan, or is this thing perfect, or is there damage done to it, or were they just inaccurate to within 9 microns? So it's truly unfathomable. It's remarkable. As Mark says in his artifact, that consistent microscopic precision implemented across 12 different radii with fixed ratios in granite is an unfathomable achievement. And what's even,
I still think it's only unfathomable achievement if you're comparing modern fabrication techniques with tools and fabrication techniques of the past. And then constrain those ancient techniques with time and money requirements, budget and schedule. And then forget that people doing this stuff by hand end up being extremely skilled. These vases that they found about 50,000 of them. That's 50 with 3 zeros. There are a shitload of them. Aliens with laser beams. Yep. For sure. So there's a lot of these hard stone high precision vases out there. There's so many of them that private collectors can buy them from not a black market. There's no black market for these because there are so many of them. You can go buy one. They're very expensive. You probably shouldn't even look up how much they cost because it's probably ridiculous. But there's no reason that a highly skilled craftsman couldn't have his tooling set up to be able to produce this. Just like our craftsmen, have machining tools set up with the tooling to do specific jobs, why wouldn't the ancient craftsmen have that? And then also they would have 25, 30, 35, 40 years of experience making these things by hand. And when you get to that level, if you're not complete shit at it, they would be very, very, very good at it. And being a skilled craftsman in this particular field was probably a generational career. It was a generational trade. So your grandfather did it, your father did it, you did it, your son will do it, your grandson will do it. You watch a guy whipped to death for not being good at it. That's funny. That's really funny. But I think ancient Egypt was much less slave based and punishment for failure based than I think a lot of us have been led to believe. So like when I grew up, when I was in elementary school learning about ancient Egypt, the theory was the pyramids were built by slaves. Well, the consensus since then has had enough evidence to say that, they weren't. They were skilled, paid craftsmen. And if there were slaves, there were very, very few of them doing menial task work that didn't require skill to help out. Yeah, we learn more all the time. So, yeah.
More interesting about this, and this was the thing that really sealed the deal for me, is that we find it in multiple vases. We find the exact same radial traversal pattern, the same fixed ratio.
Yep.
In
just like a potter with their tools. You go to one potter, a lot of their work is going to have the same stuff because they use the same tools to make different pots. You go to a different potter, it'll be a little different, but it's going to have the same kind of theme to it. Their tools will be slightly different, but they will be more similar to the other potter than they are different. It was also lush and vibrant. Yeah. So, color in the ancient world was way more prevalent than what is left for us to observe. Way more colorful and vibrant. And there's a couple of videos I watched a while ago where they talk about how the pigment vibrancy of the paint that is left on ancient structures is darker because over time paint will darken in its luminancy. Yeah, so the stuff you see now is much darker than it would have been back in its heyday, like when it would have first been painted. There would have been much more color. Like Roman statues, yeah. So if you go to Rome and you look at the Roman statues, on video it's all white. If you look closely at them though, there are remnants of the original paint that would be on those statues. So as classical and cool that all the white marble looks completely white, they weren't like that. They were always painted. Always painted. Imagine the Pantheon not white. Imagine it just doused in colorful paint. That's wild.
Multiple vases. Here are two more vases that were scanned. This is what's called the thin vase on the left and the spinner vase on the right. And you can see all of the circles that are drawn on these models of these vases that define its features. They all conform to the radial traversal pattern with a very, very tiny degree of or margin of error. So when, you know, it's one thing to find this traversal pattern and this mathematical design on one vase, but when we look at other vases and we find the exact same fixed ratio relationship between the geometric components that make these up, I mean, these were 100% designed, and they were designed mathematically. Then there's a whole other can of worms about how you actually get from that mathematical design to output, and then an accurate output, machining output. I get into that in some of the vase videos. We're not going to dive into that here, but I think that's one of the reasons that these were 100% designed with a Turing machine. They had to be. There's no other way to do it. And then they were just executed and machined with just mind-bending precision, which we can see from the scan results. So, you know, looking at the scans, and the scan results have been ongoing. There's been more scanning of many more vases done now. And in fact, even to greater degrees of accuracy than what we've done before. I think the initial first few vases were done using structured light scanners, which gives us, you know, resolution of around about a thousandth of an inch, maybe a little bit under that. And now a lot of these are being scanned in CT X-ray machines, which really has micron level resolution, which is about a 25th of a thousandth of an inch. And the interesting thing about CT X-rays is that when you scan these vases and these stone vessels using that, you actually get the insides as well. Structured light only really gives you the outside. CT X-rays gives you the inside. So these models here of these couple of vases have been studied, and geometric analysis and accuracy analysis has been performed on them. These are standard sort of reports that are done for any industrial process. Any time somebody creates a precision part, say for the aerospace industry, in a jet engine or a rocket engine, these parts, and you want to verify that your part matches the design to within the tolerances that you've specified, this is the exact sort of procedure that you would put it through. And it takes, you know, a skilled person using the GD&T or the geometric distancing and tolerancing tools to figure that out. So you're essentially creating perfect shapes and then comparing the scan model to them. And so what you see here is I think, absolutely remarkable. It shows you the degree of precision that is found in these vessels. Really, what you want to look at is things like the color coding of these bars next to these graphs. So, you know, within the green areas, you're talking about, you know, 0.003 of an inch from basically perfect, and then it gets up to about, you know, 0.030 of an inch in the red areas. So there's this scale, and then so the color coding on the vase shows you how much of that vase is accurate to within around 0.003 of an inch.
What I see here is that they shaped these vases with an extreme amount of skill, and then when they went to polish them, they have high and low spots where they were polishing out blemishes, or they had some areas that wouldn't polish very well, so they had to, you know, keep going. I don't see anything here that you couldn't achieve with a modern understanding of how to hand polish. Large strokes with a rag and some polishing compound. I don't see it. I think the vase thing is really, really interesting. And I can see some of the points that Ben is trying to make, but none of his evidence is out of spec with how I know that we can work stone by hand. Having done it before. And me doing it by hand means I have an air-powered grinder with a diming polishing pad on it. But if you take that away and you have a rag or another rock or a wooden block with some kind of abrasive compound on it. All that stands between that person and how I have shaped stone by hand is a time constraint. Where's he going with this? Alien lasers, magic? No, he doesn't really get into that. He's more presenting this evidence and trying to speculate what other evidence there could be to explain this. He doesn't really get into like pseudoscience or the fantasy realm with this stuff. You agree it's possible with human ingenuity? Yeah, absolutely. I think the flaw in the thinking that this is suggesting that Egyptians had more advanced technology than we're aware of. I think the flaw is that we're constraining their production with the constraints that we have on modern production, which are mostly money and schedule. I don't think the ancient Egyptians had that constraint like we do. And I think they had many more craftsmen that could do this, that had many more years experience in doing this work than we do in any industry currently. So I think I'm going to stop it there because this is like a 2.5 hour video and we've done like half an hour with it. I do want to go, I hadn't planned to, but I expected this video to wow me a little more. I want to go to another video that actually does wow me a little bit more from this YouTube channel. And we'll take a look at that. It has to do with finding the ancient Egyptian labyrinth. So let's take a quick ad break and then we'll come back for that. This one is really good. It's less speculative and much more like